If someone offered you $1 million to marry a stranger, would you sign the contract? Or would you ask what they were really buying? Olivia Carter stared at the eviction notice resting beside her mother's hospital bill and wondered how many dreams a person could lose in a single month before they stopped feeling surprised. The tiny apartment in Columbus, Ohio, felt smaller than ever. Rain tapped softly against the window. The heater rattled. A stack of overdue envelopes sat untouched on the kitchen table. 3 years ago, Olivia had imagined a different future. She had pictured children filling her art classroom with laughter, weekend farmers markets, maybe even a small studio of her own someday. Instead, she was calculating how many days remained before the landlord changed the locks. Her mother's treatment costs had swallowed every dollar she earned. Every extra shift, every sacrifice, every hopeful plan. Olivia rubbed her tired eyes and looked down at her phone when it buzzed unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar. "Ms. Carter," a calm female voice asked. "My name is Evelyn Grant. I represent Sterling Holdings. Mr. Nathaniel Sterling would like to meet with you tomorrow morning." Olivia frowned. "I think you have the wrong person." "We do not. Mr. Sterling specifically requested you." The call ended before she could ask another question. Nathaniel Sterling. The name was impossible to miss. Even people who never followed business news knew who he was. Billion-dollar investments, magazine covers, charity galas. One of the most powerful executives in America. The idea that someone like that wanted to meet a struggling art teacher made absolutely no sense. The next morning, Olivia stood outside Sterling Tower, feeling completely out of place among the polished glass walls and luxury cars. Her coat was old. Her shoes had been repaired twice. Around her, people moved with confidence and purpose. She felt like an accidental visitor in somebody else's world. A receptionist escorted her to the top floor. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a private office larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Sunlight reflected off steel and glass. Everything was elegant, controlled, expensive, and standing near the window was Nathaniel Sterling himself. He was taller than she expected, dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. The kind of man who looked completely comfortable making decisions that changed other people's lives. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Thank you for coming." Olivia sat carefully across from him. "I'm still trying to understand why I'm here." Nathaniel studied her quietly for a moment. Not in a rude way. More like he was evaluating something, measuring something. Then he slid a folder across the desk. "Because I have a proposal." Olivia opened it. Her breath caught immediately. The numbers printed on the page looked unreal. Medical expenses, housing assistance, financial security beyond anything she had ever imagined. She turned another page, then another. Her confusion deepened. Finally, she looked up. "This has to be a mistake." "It isn't. You're offering to pay all of this." "Yes." Olivia swallowed hard. "Why?" Nathaniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because I want you to marry me." Silence filled the room. Olivia blinked once, twice. Surely she had misunderstood. "Marry you." "A contractual arrangement," he clarified. 1 year. Specific conditions. Mutual benefit. Olivia stared at him. Somewhere beneath the shock, a laugh almost escaped. This sounded less like real life and more like one of the ridiculous romance novels her mother secretly loved. "You don't even know me." Nathaniel remained calm. "I know enough." "Then you know I'm not interested in marrying a stranger." "Under normal circumstances, perhaps not." His eyes shifted briefly toward the hospital paperwork visible in the folder. "But your circumstances are not normal." The words landed harder than Olivia wanted to admit. Because he was right. Every fear, every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, they were all sitting between them now. Nathaniel folded his hands. "Take the contract home. Read every page. If you decline, your life continues exactly as it is. If you accept, your mother receives the best care available immediately." Olivia looked down again. The offer felt impossible, dangerous, tempting. Somewhere deep inside, every instinct told her to walk away. Yet another voice whispered something far more frightening. What if this was the only chance she had left? As she left Sterling Tower carrying the folder against her chest, she didn't notice Nathaniel watching from the window above. His expression remained unreadable. Because Olivia Carter believed she had just been offered the opportunity of a lifetime. What she did not know was that she had already become part of a test she never agreed to take. Olivia did not sleep that night. The contract remained open on her kitchen table long after midnight, illuminated by the weak yellow light above the stove. Every few minutes her eyes returned to the same number printed near the bottom of the page. The amount was large enough to erase every hospital bill, every overdue payment, every fear that had followed her for the past 3 years. Yet the price attached to it felt impossible to measure. Across the apartment, her mother slept quietly on the worn sofa bed they had converted into a temporary bedroom. The sight tightened something inside Olivia's chest. She remembered the woman who had spent years encouraging every painting, every dream, every impossible ambition. Now that same woman apologized whenever another medical bill arrived in the mail. By sunrise, Olivia had reached a decision. 2 days later, she returned to Sterling Tower carrying the contract in a simple manila folder. The receptionist immediately escorted her upstairs. Nathaniel stood near the window exactly as he had during their first meeting, as if he had not moved at all since she left. His expression revealed nothing when she placed the signed documents on his desk. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nathaniel glanced at the signature on the final page and nodded once. "Thank you, Miss Carter." Olivia folded her arms. "I am not sure congratulations are appropriate." Something almost resembling amusement flickered in his eyes. Almost. Perhaps not. Within hours, events moved faster than Olivia could process. Lawyers finalized paperwork. Financial advisors explained arrangements. Medical specialists contacted her mother's doctors. Every problem that had seemed impossible 1 week earlier suddenly began disappearing. It felt unreal, like walking through someone else's life. The following Saturday, a private ceremony was held inside a historic estate outside Columbus. No reporters, no extravagant guest list, only attorneys, witnesses, and a judge. Olivia wore a simple ivory dress chosen by a stylist she had met less than 24 hours earlier. Nathaniel wore a dark suit. The entire ceremony lasted less than 15 minutes. When it ended, the judge smiled warmly and declared them husband and wife. Olivia expected to feel something dramatic. Relief, panic, excitement. Instead, she felt strangely numb. Nathaniel offered a polite handshake afterward. Not a hug, not even a smile, just a formal handshake. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said. Cooperation. The word sounded more appropriate for a business merger than a marriage. Their new home sat on a private property overlooking rolling green hills nearly 20 miles outside the city. The mansion was breathtaking. White stone walls, massive windows, carefully maintained gardens stretching across several acres. Yet despite its beauty, the place felt surprisingly quiet, almost lonely. A housekeeper named Margaret greeted Olivia at the entrance. Several staff members offered polite welcomes. Everyone seemed professional, respectful, reserved, as though they were following invisible rules she did not yet understand. That evening, Nathaniel requested a meeting in the library. Olivia entered to find him seated beside a fireplace, a second folder resting on the table between them. Her stomach sank immediately. "More paperwork?" she asked. "The official terms of our arrangement," Nathaniel replied. She sat across from him and opened the folder. Several pages detailed expectations, public appearances, confidentiality agreements, financial protections, behavioral guidelines. The language was professional and precise. Nathaniel watched quietly as she read. "You really thought of everything. I prefer clarity." Olivia continued turning pages until one section caught her attention. Full access to household resources. She read aloud. "What exactly does that mean?" Nathaniel slid a black credit card across the table. "It means you may purchase whatever you need." Olivia stared at it. Anything reasonable. She looked back at him suspiciously. "And you are comfortable giving that kind of access to someone you barely know?" Nathaniel's expression never changed. "Yes." The answer felt strangely rehearsed, like he had expected the question. Olivia studied him carefully. Most people would have been eager to enjoy wealth like this. Luxury cars, designer clothing, exotic vacations. Yet as she looked around the enormous library, surrounded by things money could buy, she found herself thinking only about her mother receiving treatment without fear. That was all she had wanted from the beginning. Nathaniel observed her silence. "Is something wrong?" Olivia slowly pushed the black card back across the table. "I do not need this." For the first time, Genuine surprise appeared on his face. Only for a second, but it was there. You should keep it, he said. Olivia shook her head. If I need something, I will ask. Otherwise it stays with you. A strange silence settled between them. Nathaniel glanced at the untouched card, then at Olivia. Something in his eyes shifted, subtle and unreadable, almost as if the answer she had given mattered far more than it should have. And for the first time since signing the contract, Olivia had the unsettling feeling that someone was quietly keeping score. The weeks that followed settled into an unusual rhythm. Olivia quickly discovered that life inside the Sterling estate operated with quiet precision. Every employee knew their responsibilities. Every schedule was carefully planned. Every detail seemed managed long before a problem could appear. Yet beneath the polished surface, she began noticing something else. People rarely relaxed when Nathaniel was nearby. Conversations became shorter. Smiles disappeared. Even senior staff seemed cautious around him. It was not fear exactly. It was something closer to uncertainty. Nobody ever seemed sure what he was thinking. One rainy Tuesday morning, Olivia entered the main dining room and found a young housekeeper standing near the broken remains of an antique porcelain vase. Tears filled the woman's eyes. Another employee was trying unsuccessfully to comfort her. Olivia immediately walked over. What happened? She asked gently. The housekeeper looked devastated. I was dusting the shelf. I accidentally bumped it. She glanced toward the doorway. Mr. Sterling is going to be furious. Olivia looked down at the shattered pieces. The vase was probably worth more than her old car. Before she could respond, Nathaniel entered the room. Silence spread instantly. The young employee lowered her head. Olivia noticed the panic on the woman's face. Nathaniel's eyes moved from the broken vase to the trembling housekeeper, then to Olivia. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Nathaniel asked, Is everyone all right? The question surprised Olivia. It clearly surprised the employee as well. The young woman blinked. Sir. Nathaniel nodded toward the broken porcelain. Objects can be replaced. People cannot. Relief flooded the woman's face. She thanked him repeatedly before leaving to gather cleaning supplies. Nathaniel turned to Olivia. You seem disappointed. She folded her arms. I was expecting you to react differently. A faint smile appeared. Because I am the cold millionaire husband? Olivia tried not to smile back. Something like that. Nathaniel said nothing further, but later that afternoon, he sat alone in his office reviewing security footage from the dining room. He watched Olivia move toward the frightened employee before anyone else had reacted. He replayed the recording twice, then 3 times. Finally, he opened a private file stored on his computer. Beside Olivia's name, he entered a brief note. Protects others without hesitation. Downstairs, completely unaware of the observation, Olivia spent her afternoon helping Margaret organize donations for a local shelter. Several storage rooms contained furniture, clothing, and household items no longer used by the estate. Olivia suggested creating monthly deliveries for families in need. Margaret loved the idea. Within days, the program was underway. Again, Nathaniel quietly watched from a distance. Another note appeared in the private file. Initiate solutions without personal benefit. A few days later, another situation emerged. During breakfast, Olivia overheard 2 employees discussing a groundskeeper named Walter who had missed several shifts. Most people seemed annoyed by the inconvenience. Olivia simply asked if anyone knew whether he was all right. Nobody did. That afternoon, she convinced a driver to take her to Walter's small home, nearly 15 miles away. She discovered the elderly man recovering from a severe case of pneumonia. His refrigerator was nearly empty. His medications were expensive. Olivia spent the next several hours arranging grocery deliveries and contacting medical assistance programs. When she returned to the estate after sunset, she found Nathaniel waiting in the library. You were gone all day, he said. Walter needed help. Nathaniel studied her. You barely know him. Olivia looked genuinely confused. Why would that matter? Nathaniel held her gaze. For a moment, something unreadable passed across his face. Then he nodded once and returned to his paperwork. Later that night, after the mansion had grown quiet, Nathaniel opened the private file again. He read through every observation collected so far. Most people who entered his life eventually revealed hidden agendas. Ambition, greed, self-interest. He had spent years learning how to recognize the signs. Yet Olivia continued disrupting every expectation. She never asked for jewelry, never requested expensive gifts, never tried gaining influence. Instead, she seemed focused entirely on helping people who could offer nothing in return. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair and stared through the darkened window. For the first time since creating the test, he found himself facing an uncomfortable possibility. What if Olivia was exactly who she appeared to be? And for a man who had built his entire life around doubt, that possibility felt far more dangerous than any failure. By the beginning of autumn, Olivia had become something unexpected inside the Sterling estate. She was no longer viewed as the temporary wife who had arrived through a contract. She had quietly become the person everyone trusted. Staff members sought her advice. Gardeners stopped to chat when she walked the grounds. Even Margaret, who had worked for the Sterling family for nearly 20 years, often found herself smiling whenever Olivia entered a room. Yet the person who remained the hardest to understand was still Nathaniel. Some days he seemed distant enough to disappear behind the walls he had built around himself. Other days she would catch glimpses of someone entirely different. Small moments, brief moments, moments that vanished before she could fully understand them. One Saturday morning, Olivia visited her mother at the rehabilitation center outside the city. For the first time in years, her mother looked stronger. Color had returned to her face. Her smile appeared more often. Watching her walk across the room without assistance felt like witnessing a miracle. As they sat together drinking tea, her mother studied her carefully. "You are happier," she said. Olivia laughed softly. "I do not think anyone would describe my marriage as romantic. That is not what I asked." Olivia looked down at her cup. The truth was complicated. Nathaniel frustrated her, confused her, challenged her. Yet she found herself thinking about him far more often than she wanted to admit. On the drive back to the estate, she tried convincing herself it was simply gratitude. Nothing more. That evening, a charity gala took place at one of Sterling Holdings' downtown properties. Olivia attended because the contract required public appearances. She wore a simple navy gown selected by a stylist. Around her, wealthy donors exchanged business cards and discussed investments worth millions of dollars. Olivia felt completely out of place. Then she noticed a catering assistant struggling to carry several heavy trays through a crowded hallway. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and helped. The young woman looked relieved. "Thank you," she said. "Most people just walk past." Olivia smiled. "Then they are missing opportunities to be useful." Unbeknownst to her, Nathaniel had witnessed the entire interaction from across the room. Later that evening, another test quietly unfolded. A senior executive approached Olivia during dinner and casually mentioned an upcoming investment project. The man hinted that early information could create enormous personal profit if shared with the right people. Olivia immediately interrupted him. "That sounds unethical." The executive laughed awkwardly, assuming she was joking. She was not. Within seconds, she excused herself and walked away. From the opposite side of the ballroom, Nathaniel watched carefully. Another note would eventually find its way into the private file. Rejects personal gain when integrity is compromised. As the weeks passed, similar situations continued appearing. Opportunities, temptations, shortcuts. Olivia ignored every one of them. What Nathaniel failed to anticipate was the effect those observations were beginning to have on him. The file had originally been created to expose weaknesses. Instead, it was becoming a collection of reasons he respected her. One evening, he sat alone in his office reading through months of entries. Protects others without hesitation. Shares resources freely. Rejects manipulation. Values people over status. The list continued for pages. Nathaniel closed the folder and stared into the darkness beyond the window. Something inside him felt increasingly unsettled. The test was supposed to provide certainty. Instead, it was creating questions he could not answer. The following night, a powerful storm rolled across central Ohio. Rain hammered the windows. Wind rattled the old trees surrounding the estate. Around midnight, Olivia woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Curious, she stepped outside her room and noticed light coming from the library downstairs. She found Nathaniel sitting alone beside the fireplace. He appeared exhausted, more exhausted than she had ever seen him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Olivia quietly sat in the chair across from him. "Could not sleep?" she asked. Nathaniel stared into the fire. "Something like that." Minutes passed in comfortable silence. No business discussions. No contract obligations. No carefully controlled conversations. Just two people listening to the rain. Finally, Nathaniel spoke. "Do you ever regret signing the agreement?" Olivia considered the question. Sometimes. He nodded slowly. Why? She looked toward the dancing flames. Because I thought money would solve everything. Nathaniel's expression tightened slightly. And I learned that some problems are not financial. The answer lingered between them. For reasons neither fully understood, neither wanted to leave. Outside, the storm continued rolling across the countryside. Inside, something quieter was beginning to change. And for the first time since the contract marriage began, Nathaniel Sterling felt something far more dangerous than suspicion. He felt the beginning of trust. The trust that had begun forming between Olivia and Nathaniel changed the atmosphere of the estate in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. Conversations became easier. Silences became less uncomfortable. Some evenings they shared dinner without discussing contracts, schedules, or obligations. Instead, they talked about books, childhood memories, favorite places they had visited, and dreams they once believed would happen. Olivia learned that Nathaniel had not always been the guarded man the world knew. Years earlier, before business magazines and billion-dollar deals, he had been optimistic, open, trusting. Somewhere along the way, that version of him had disappeared. Yet every now and then she caught glimpses of it returning. One chilly November morning, Nathaniel announced something unexpected during breakfast. Sterling Holdings is facing serious financial pressure. Olivia looked up immediately. What happened? Nathaniel rubbed his forehead. Several major projects collapsed at the same time. Investors are nervous. The media is already speculating. The explanation sounded believable. His tone sounded believable. Everything about it felt real. Olivia watched him carefully. He appeared exhausted, more withdrawn than usual. Throughout the following week, newspapers published stories questioning the future of the company. Television commentators discussed falling stock prices. Employees whispered in hallways. Several social invitations suddenly disappeared. Business associates who once eagerly sought Nathaniel's attention became strangely unavailable. Olivia noticed all of it. She also noticed something else. Nathaniel seemed to be watching her. Not constantly, not obviously, but enough for her to feel it, as if he were waiting for something. One evening, she found him sitting alone on the rear terrace overlooking the dark hills beyond the estate. A cold wind moved through the trees. Nathaniel stared into the distance. You should be inside, Olivia said. It is freezing. I have had worse days. She sat beside him anyway. People disappear quickly when they think money is disappearing. Nathaniel gave a humorless laugh. That observation comes from experience? No, Olivia admitted. Just common sense. Silence settled between them. Finally, Nathaniel asked the question he had apparently been carrying for days. If everything fell apart tomorrow, what would you do? Olivia answered without hesitation. The same thing I always do. Nathaniel turned toward her. And what is that? Figure out what needs fixing and start there. Something flickered in his expression. Hope. Disbelief. Maybe both. The following weeks became increasingly difficult. More reports appeared. More criticism followed. Several members of Nathaniel's social circle quietly distanced themselves. One prominent investor canceled a long-standing partnership. Another publicly questioned Nathaniel's leadership. Olivia watched all of it unfold. Yet she never considered leaving. She never mentioned the contract. Never asked whether her financial protections were still secure. Instead, she focused on helping wherever she could. She organized support for worried staff members. She reassured employees concerned about their jobs. She spent evenings helping Nathaniel review charitable programs he refused to abandon despite the company's troubles. One night, Margaret entered the library carrying tea and paused when she saw Olivia asleep on a nearby sofa. Financial reports were scattered across the coffee table. Nathaniel sat opposite her, still working. Margaret smiled knowingly. Most people would have left by now. Nathaniel glanced toward Olivia. His answer came quietly. She is not most people. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Nathaniel remained alone in his office. The private file sat open on his computer screen. Hundreds of observations filled the pages. Every test, every situation, every opportunity to choose herself over others. Olivia had failed none of them. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The problem was becoming impossible to ignore. He had originally designed the test expecting disappointment, expecting proof that everyone eventually revealed selfish motives. Instead, Olivia had dismantled every belief supporting that worldview. And the more she did, the more frightened he became. Because if she was genuine, Then all the walls he had built around himself suddenly looked unnecessary. A few days later, during another difficult week of negative headlines, Olivia found Nathaniel standing alone in the greenhouse behind the estate. Winter sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling above them. "You know," she said softly, "when I signed that contract, I thought money solved everything." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "You already told me that." "I know." She stepped closer, but I never finished the thought. He waited. Olivia looked directly at him. "Money helps. It solves practical problems. But people survive hard times because of other people, not because of numbers on a screen." Nathaniel held her gaze. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Olivia added something simple. "Whatever happens, I am not going anywhere." The words should have comforted him. Instead, they struck directly at the part of him that feared them most. Because for the first time since creating the test, Nathaniel realized he desperately wanted to believe her. December arrived with a blanket of snow covering the hills surrounding the Sterling estate. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside Nathaniel's mind, a storm had been building for weeks. Every day made the truth harder to ignore. Olivia had remained beside him through every challenge. She had stayed when others left. She had offered support without asking for anything in return. She had passed every test he had created. Yet instead of bringing him peace, that realization filled him with growing unease. One evening, unable to sleep, Nathaniel wandered into the west wing of the mansion, a section rarely used by anyone. The hallway lights were dim. Portraits of previous generations lined the walls. At the end of the corridor sat a private study that had once belonged to his father. The room had remained almost untouched for years. Nathaniel stood quietly before an old bookshelf before finally pulling open a drawer hidden beneath a cabinet. Inside rested a small collection of photographs, letters, and documents he rarely allowed himself to see. Memories he preferred buried. His eyes settled on a photograph of himself at 12 years old standing beside his father. They were smiling. Back then, life had seemed simple. Back then, he had believed people always meant what they said. Everything changed 2 years later. His father had trusted the wrong people. Business partners who promised loyalty. Friends who promised support. A woman who promised love. One by one, those promises disappeared when financial difficulties arrived. Nathaniel never forgot watching his father sit alone at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at stacks of unpaid bills while former friends stopped answering calls. The experience left scars that never fully healed. Years later, when Nathaniel experienced betrayal in his own personal life, those old wounds reopened. The result was a man who trusted contracts more than people and evidence more than emotions. The next afternoon, Olivia returned from visiting her mother and found Margaret decorating the main hall for the holidays. Garlands hung across stair railings. White lights glowed softly against the windows. The mansion felt warmer than usual. "You have been good for this house," Margaret said unexpectedly while adjusting a wreath. Olivia smiled. "I only helped hang decorations." Margaret shook her head. "No, I mean all of it." Her expression softened. "Before you arrived, this place felt empty. Beautiful, but empty." Olivia looked toward the second-floor balcony where Nathaniel's office door remained closed. She did not know how to respond. The truth was that her feelings had become impossible to deny. Somewhere between hospital visits, late-night conversations, and quiet mornings together, the contract had stopped feeling like a contract. The realization frightened her, because the agreement still had an expiration date, and she had no idea whether Nathaniel felt anything similar. 2 nights later, an unexpected snowstorm swept across the region. Roads became difficult to travel. Flights were delayed. Most of the estate staff left early to reach their families safely. By evening, only a handful remained. Olivia found Nathaniel in the library again, sitting beside the fireplace with a glass of sparkling water untouched on the table. The flames cast warm light across the room. "You spend a lot of time in this chair," she said. Nathaniel glanced up. "Occupational hazard. Being a billionaire? Overthinking." Olivia laughed softly before sitting nearby. For a while they simply watched the fire. Then Nathaniel spoke without looking at her. "Do you know why I created so many rules?" Olivia hesitated. "Control?" A faint smile appeared. "Partly." His expression soon grew serious again. "When you trust someone completely and they disappoint you, it changes how you see the world." Olivia listened quietly. Nathaniel rarely discussed personal matters. Not everyone leaves, she said gently. Some do. Some stay. The room fell silent. Nathaniel looked toward her then, really looked at her. For a brief moment, the walls around him seemed lower than ever before. You make that sound easy. Olivia shook her head. It is not easy. Trust is terrifying. Nathaniel's eyes lingered on hers. Neither noticed how long the silence lasted afterward. Outside, snow continued falling beyond the windows. Inside, something fragile and important hung between them. Yet neither understood that the greatest test of all was no longer about money, loyalty, or sacrifice. It was about whether Nathaniel could finally confront the fear that had controlled his entire life, and whether Olivia could survive the truth waiting just beyond the walls he had not yet torn down. The truth arrived on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Olivia had spent the morning at the rehabilitation center with her mother before returning to the estate earlier than expected. Snow still covered the grounds, sparkling beneath a pale winter sun. The mansion was unusually quiet. Most staff members were occupied elsewhere, leaving the hallways almost empty. As Olivia walked toward the library, she remembered leaving a sketchbook there the previous evening. The door was slightly open when she arrived. At first she intended only to step inside and retrieve it. Then she noticed a folder resting on the desk. Her name was printed clearly across the front. Olivia froze. Curiosity pulled her forward. Unease followed immediately behind it. She should have walked away. Instead, she opened the folder. The first page contained a date. The second contained observations. The third contained evaluations. Olivia's heartbeat quickened. She turned another page. Then another. Protects others without hesitation. Rejects personal gain. Shares resources freely. Demonstrates loyalty under pressure. Additional pages followed. Detailed notes. Specific incidents. Conversations. Reactions. Decisions she had made over the past several months. Some observations included dates and times. Others referenced situations nobody should have known about unless they had been deliberately monitored. Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. At first, she could not fully comprehend what she was seeing. Then she noticed a second folder beneath the first. This one contained photographs, security images, reports, internal memos, everything connected to her, everything documented, everything analyzed. Her hands trembled slightly as understanding settled over her. None of the tests had been accidents. None of the situations had been random. The broken vase, the investment conversation, the financial crisis. Every event had been part of something carefully designed, carefully measured, carefully recorded. A sound behind her caused her to turn. Nathaniel stood in the doorway. For a brief moment, neither moved. Neither spoke. Olivia saw the realization appear in his eyes the instant he recognized the folder in her hands. "Olivia," he said quietly. The single word shattered the silence. "How long?" she asked. Her voice sounded strangely calm. "How long have you been doing this?" Nathaniel stepped forward. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" She held up the folder. "Explain why my entire life became a performance review." Pain crossed his face. "It was not like that." Olivia laughed once. The sound carried no humor. "Then tell me what it was like." Nathaniel struggled for an answer, because the truth sounded exactly as terrible as it was. "When we met, I needed certainty. So you investigated me." "At first. And after that." Her eyes filled with disappointment more than anger. Somehow that hurt him even more. "After that I could not stop." The admission hung heavily between them. Olivia looked down at the pages again. Every act of kindness, every private decision, every vulnerable moment, reduced to observations and scores. "I trusted you," she whispered. Nathaniel took another step closer. "I know." "No," she shook her head. "You do not." Her voice finally broke. "You never trusted me at all." The words struck harder than any accusation, because they were true. Nathaniel had spent months watching her prove herself while refusing to take the one risk she had taken from the beginning. Trust. Olivia carefully closed the folder and placed it back on the desk. The movement felt final. The financial crisis was fake too, was it not? Nathaniel lowered his eyes. He could not lie anymore. "Yes." Olivia nodded slowly. "I stayed because I cared about you." Silence. "Not because of the contract." More silence. "Not because of the money." Nathaniel looked at her then. Really looked at her. The hurt in her expression was devastating. "Olivia, please." She stepped backward. "Do you know what the worst part is?" Her voice trembled. "I was starting to believe you cared about me too." Nathaniel's chest tightened. I do. Then why was I still being tested? He opened his mouth, but no answer came. Because there was no answer capable of repairing what had just broken. Olivia gave a small nod, as if finally accepting something painful. You were so afraid of being betrayed that you became the person doing the betraying. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Congratulations, Nathaniel. I passed every test. The words landed with quiet devastation. Then she added the sentence he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. The tragedy is that you failed the only one that mattered. Moments later, she walked past him and out of the room. Nathaniel did not follow. He remained standing beside the desk, surrounded by the evidence of his own fear. Outside, the winter sky had begun to darken. Inside, for the first time in years, Nathaniel Sterling understood exactly what it felt like to lose something priceless. The days after Olivia left felt strangely silent. The Sterling estate remained beautiful. The staff continued their routines. Meetings filled Nathaniel's calendar. Business operations moved forward. Yet everything felt different. Every room carried reminders of her presence. The greenhouse where they had shared quiet conversations. The library where she had fallen asleep while helping him review reports. The dining room where she had convinced staff members to laugh again. For the first time in years, Nathaniel discovered that success could feel completely empty. 3 days after Olivia's departure, divorce papers arrived. They sat unopened on his desk for nearly an hour. When he finally signed them, his hand hesitated above the signature line. Not because the contract marriage was ending. That had always been temporary. What hurt was knowing that the one relationship he wanted to keep was the one he had destroyed himself. That evening, Nathaniel entered the private study and opened the file he had spent months building. Page after page documented Olivia's choices. Her kindness. Her integrity. Her loyalty. He read every entry again. Then he noticed something he had somehow missed. None of the pages actually described Olivia's failures. Every page described his fears. Every test reflected a wound he had never healed. Every observation revealed a man desperately searching for reasons not to trust. Slowly, he began removing pages from the binder. By midnight, the desk was covered with documents. Reports, notes, evaluations, photographs, months of evidence, months of doubt, months of fear disguised as caution. Nathaniel stared at the pile and finally understood what Olivia had meant. She had never been the person being measured. He had. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting of Sterling Holdings' executive board. Senior leaders gathered in the corporate headquarters expecting discussions about investments and quarterly projections. Instead, they found Nathaniel standing before them holding a thick binder. His expression was calm, determined. Before we begin, he said, there is something I need to address. The room fell silent. Nathaniel spent the next 20 minutes doing something none of them expected. He spoke openly about trust, about fear, about mistakes. He admitted that for years he had allowed past disappointments to control present decisions. He acknowledged that his obsession with certainty had damaged relationships and limited his ability to connect with people honestly. Several executives looked stunned. Others appeared deeply moved. Nathaniel rarely revealed anything personal. Yet he continued, the strongest people in my life were never the ones who passed tests, he said quietly. They were the ones who offered trust before I believed I deserved it. Then, in front of everyone, he placed the binder on the conference table. He opened it one final time, looked down at the pages, and closed it forever. That afternoon, he began making additional changes. The secret monitoring programs ended immediately. Internal policies emphasizing excessive oversight were revised. Resources were redirected toward employee support initiatives. The company culture slowly began shifting. For the first time, Nathaniel stopped trying to control every possible outcome. Meanwhile, Olivia focused on rebuilding her own life. She rented a small apartment near her mother's rehabilitation center. She returned to teaching part-time art classes and volunteered at community programs on weekends. Outwardly, she seemed fine, but some wounds take longer to heal than others. Certain memories remained difficult to forget. Then, several weeks later, Margaret unexpectedly appeared at her apartment carrying a large envelope. I am not here on Nathaniel's behalf, Margaret said immediately. I am here on mine. Olivia accepted the envelope cautiously. Inside were photographs, not surveillance images. New photographs. Images of community centers receiving donations. scholarship programs being launched, employee support projects expanding across Ohio. Attached was a simple note written in Nathaniel's handwriting. Not an apology, not an excuse, just a single sentence. You were right. Trust begins when someone chooses it first. Olivia stared at the words for a long time after Margaret left. Something shifted inside her. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But perhaps the beginning of understanding. Because for the first time since discovering the truth, she could see evidence that Nathaniel was no longer trying to prove whether other people deserved trust. He was finally learning how to offer it himself. Spring arrived slowly across Ohio. Snow melted from the hills. Green returned to the countryside surrounding the city. Life moved forward one day at a time, carrying both Olivia and Nathaniel into a future neither had imagined months earlier. For Olivia, the season brought new opportunities. Her art classes expanded. More students enrolled. Community organizations began partnering with her programs. The small apartment she once viewed as temporary gradually started feeling like home. Yet despite the progress, certain thoughts never completely disappeared. Sometimes while driving to visit her mother, she found herself remembering late conversations beside the library fireplace. Sometimes she caught herself wondering whether Nathaniel still spent evenings alone in that enormous mansion. And sometimes she reread the note Margaret had delivered, tracing the words with her fingertips before quietly placing it back inside a drawer. Meanwhile, Nathaniel continued changing both himself and the company he led. Employee support initiatives grew rapidly. Scholarship programs expanded throughout the state. Community centers received funding without complicated conditions attached. For the first time in his adult life, Nathaniel discovered that trust was not something earned through perfect performance. It was something offered despite uncertainty. The lesson was uncomfortable, humbling, necessary. Then one afternoon, nearly 4 months after Olivia left the estate, a formal invitation arrived in her mailbox. Sterling Holdings Community Foundation Annual Gala. Olivia almost declined immediately. She had no interest in returning to that world. Yet something about the invitation felt different. Attached to it was a handwritten note from Margaret. Please come. Some stories deserve a proper ending. The gala took place in downtown Columbus at a beautifully restored historic theater. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand hall. Music drifted softly through the room. Guests filled the space with conversation and laughter. Olivia entered quietly, hoping to avoid attention. She failed almost immediately. Several former employees from the estate greeted her warmly. Others thanked her for programs she had inspired. More than once she heard someone describe positive changes happening throughout the company. Eventually, an announcement echoed through the ballroom. The evening's keynote presentation was about to begin. Guests moved toward the theater seating area. Olivia found a place near the back. Moments later, Nathaniel stepped onto the stage. He looked different. Not physically. Something deeper. The constant tension she once saw in his eyes seemed gone. He stood before hundreds of people and began speaking about community investment, education, and opportunity. Then, unexpectedly, the speech changed direction. Several months ago, Nathaniel said, "I believed leadership meant protecting myself from disappointment." The room grew quiet. I believed trust was something other people needed to earn. Olivia's heart began beating faster. Nathaniel continued. Then someone entered my life and showed me that I had everything backwards. His gaze moved through the audience until it found hers. She passed every test I created because I was too afraid to trust what was already in front of me. Silence filled the theater. The truth is that she never needed to prove who she was. I needed to learn who I was becoming. Then Nathaniel reached beneath the podium and lifted a familiar binder. The same binder that had nearly destroyed everything. Slowly he opened it, looked down at the pages one final time. Then he closed it and handed it to a staff member waiting nearby. Those pages documented fear, he said. Tonight, I choose something better. A large screen illuminated behind him. Images began appearing. Community centers, scholarship recipients, art classrooms, volunteer programs. Finally, one final image filled the screen. A newly renovated building with a sign above the entrance. The Olivia Carter Center for Arts and Community. Gasps spread through the audience. Olivia stared at the photograph in disbelief. Nathaniel stepped away from the podium and walked toward the front row. This center exists because one person taught me that kindness is not weakness. Trust is not foolish. And love cannot survive where fear makes every decision. The theater became completely silent. Nathaniel stopped directly in front of Olivia. I cannot erase my mistakes, he said softly. I cannot change what I did, but I can spend the rest of my life becoming someone worthy of the trust you offered me. Tears filled Olivia's eyes. Nathaniel reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small box. The first time I asked you to marry me, it came with conditions, contracts, and fear. He opened the box. This time it comes with none of those things. Emotion caught in his voice. Olivia Carter, would you give me a second chance and marry me for real? For a moment, the entire world seemed to stand still. Then Olivia smiled through her tears. The same warm smile that had changed countless lives, including his. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Applause erupted throughout the theater, but neither of them noticed. Because after months of misunderstandings, mistakes, growth, and forgiveness, they had finally discovered something worth more than certainty. They had found trust. And this time, neither of them planned to let it go.